abusuafo Ghana fo na mo tisen oba de nka obi a mechie obi a wa waba so bia no o watan bia bra me ani nkomo oba so a ma me ha na me ntimi nyeden me ntimi nchia so ohima oba so a right na wa mama hu o watama Sunday anwumre bra momra ne yeden yini nkomo oba de ne yeden enka obi a ho abusuafo na Ghana ho no ekosei Ghana ekosei abusuafo o watama bra momra na yeni nkomo kakra bi Ghana ekosei sese ohima me ba ya eden ache me ba ya che tino o tama na waba ni edi nkomo oba no wa ma me ha na ma eden machie o menwa ba ma Patrick dan so ho tese me chie obibiri oba de ne nkan ho adie Samuel Eny3 o ho tese me hu wa chia ankasa me so ho ye go Fred me chie abusuafo oba na wa hye na wa ma obi asu eden ahu no waba so bi ne edi nkomo me na watwe we nyina me nya time ma so honhom no Daddy Joe me dofo ho tese menin so ho ye pa honhom no ye de honhom na ye den enam enti na watwe we nyina no na honhom ne se ohima home na kan wano tum enti na watwe we nyina no ma try se meden meba life na aja ye home kakra what you say duru tembia na so wa watena se no wadweno ho wafa ho adwene enti na watwe we den mo home enti nsem bebire yakoso ensem bebire gu ohima tirim enti na no me plane me ba bia me de ko me ba chia mo enti ba bia be ko bia no mo mfa ncheme so what you say na still on ye be yi nema ni kakra ba bia be ko bia no wai den mo afa ne saa ko so na watwe nsenu bebire wo madwene mo so honhom ne se kan wano to enti no ensam ne doso enti no ba bia be ko bia no na ekọ na woni so ohima so de me ba tokro bia beden ebeje ne de na atakura me dofo ho tesen mete won kan che ya ma mente won kan me ba suwati ase tokro bia beden ebeje ne de eni ntinu me respect mu amoye de mudi machi because ohima ai me no me ko babia enya fe na me ba be sugar code anything enya fe na me ba be ka so we de menka eyese ye kan ko aye be kan abi before me say ye bre suwati ase ye bre because of niema bi ya dwene ye mindset enu ntinu ka se wo kan wontimu nkan jabi eso kan nyina right eso kan nyina enu ntinu ne amede sha ase no mene na ma social media menu yankunu menu ba ma kan kunu ma ho tesen mene na social media na mekokoko hu obi o kasa about say ye ti social media na omo ti social media ye kan tafo asem no we got to be careful na omo ntafo ne de omo no wo ho a omo ani edin no omo yesi omo ye meme abusuafo yi ene nkramufo asem say meme no ye na namo tetefo na bimu a omo di omo gina ho kan meme ho omo ho no ene ye ni abre pese ye ka eyi sa mindset no efiri omo asifo so what ase eni nti yan ya kanfo ye fi se ye nipa chen nipa bia wo Ghana ho no enu nti na okọ platform bia ye de akanfo no because sa meme no nti mfa ye nko ba bia enu nti no ye tire ye yi sa de no afiri next generation emu no afa na esiremfo ntafo mo so mo ba mu gina he a ye ba ye mo so mo ba ye meme mesra mo sa meme no mfa ye nko ba bia nti no ye hia wo bia wo Ghana ho beka se meme obi anya obia e wo Ghana ho ye nyina ye nipa ye nyina ye one people one Ghana ne ye de ko meme bia ye den eni ho obibini fa meme to ho se wo so wo ya kan ni na de meme a wo de meme na otena ho ma ade abrofu ba bedi ye so up to now mo di ye so what ase also wasua ade wona wonim wiase nyansa nyina nim brofo kan ne ade a me say intellectuals Ghana intellectuals so moti Ghana ho ena omo ntumu hunu so baabia abrofu ye den ebu fa yeso ntu wo ye wonye obia nya obia wo Ghana ho so what ase enti meme no nkoda mesra mo a me no nkoda na uye kramoni so na ase yenka wasem na Christopher de etimi ka omo asem a me say so so wo nyame be mo she ka ne da bia so so wo nyame me nwa Kofi Asamoah me chia Brazil me chia David me chia so so wo nyame a oso na se nyame no ono no de obi ka no ho asem a ono no antimo nko ma ne ho je se wu nipa e na akọ obekọ ma nyame ya me se wo nyame no ye nyame hunu fa ne to ho aduru bra ese ye be de ye bekasa saa de ne na eden e ha Ghana enu nti no ye ka ye beka eba kristosoma ye beka eba nkramosoma ye beka ni nyina hunim ade se bibi wo ma me se ala to ho no obi enu ho akramoni bi enu ho a woto ho a ode okwa akobu ade patru a otokatru ade patru no ode ama no ade chip ala meye ni chip mo obi asa na bible mu nyame so nyede meye ni chip mo obi anti sa mememe no yen yesom de yen ka ho asem no me se fa pe baabi na eden fato mememe no enko pe baabi fato adaka mpo pe baabi na we are all one people na ye de ko ene betima eden akoye nim na nansi yem ho wache so what you say eni ntunu na ye start no muntie nia ha Ghana ebini Africa as a whole ye nyina ye wo ye ma na ye de nsem bi enima enhia saa adase okọ adie automasofori okọ ye frɛ ne sen a ye frɛ ne so ye kramoni a odi makadanti o se ye ka ne se makala adie a mokokosua adie no mokurai no odi ba hye na dwene mu a 5 years o se 2 years o koto a wo sore my be me kori bi amene na die oba no de ye kramoni oba odi ne video aba onye African ni o ye saa me yira fi ba bi ofri na ode adie o ya asori a one ne nana na omo ya asori na ode be kire me ye de saa de ni be hye ne mu firi nkurabrem fa so bi ani so bibini mo me fa mpa ba bi nya den ento saa no ye Kristo ni so amuntie bi monhwe bi sorry we meyi ne kakra bi ko ga no no kura ne nsa no kura de wo kasa no kura anya manije tim kura no asem na na muntie kakra
We're asking, what is the biggest problem we have in Africa? This is it. This is one of the biggest problems we have in Africa.
That's the problem. So what you say? We had the akura sa abiri no. Ye de sam paibo we ye de e hye na dwenem. So ahu. Enti ye de sam adie we ni hye na dwenem bibi ha na ofi se oye obi na ye den e ha no. Onyina bibi ha na ense so obetena sidin no wahwe adekoro no. E obi na ye den e ha no. Ene mpaibo tenten ontena se dwene. Abusuafo me say we na e ha yen. Emfa sansem we nyeden enhye obamu. So what you say? Emfa sansem we nyeden niema bi se nyeden entete ba abusuafo ntino na ye de ko menwa ba message ko amemechia wo. So what you say? Mumie ntie sa speech we a adie Mahama maaye ewo Neata Mills ye friend is saying ni 10 years anniversary no mumie ntie bibi say na ye hia na bibi say so na as ye leaders no etumude maye emnya eye o mindset. So what you say bibi say I can't. It's no praying, Paul. Oh, okay, my home baby, I will.
Ghanaians with greater sensibility, and he would not have sought to shift the blame onto others. He would not have argued with his own people, the people he governs, who are enduring the hardships, and invent the most elaborate but implausible rationalization for why they are going through those excruciating hardships. My brothers and sisters, those to whom the people of Ghana entrust their mandate have much to learn from this distinct statesman of blessed memory. The opportunity to lead a country must be cherished and respected. The opportunity to lead a country is a privilege and not a right. The power that emanates from the mandate that is given by the people is a transient tool, temporary, and is to be devoted entirely to the resolution and upliftment of the people from the challenges they face. It is not a mandate to be weaponized for self-aggrandizement and the attainment of personal or clannish friends and family ends. The use of the power that is given by the people is to be done with sincerity, honesty, modesty, and humility. Above all, our leaders must acknowledge that they are merely temporary custodians of that power that has been given to them by the people of Ghana, and all that they need to do is to add growth to our country and not detract from it. 10 years have passed since Professor Mills left us, the poorer for his permanent departure from this troubled world. Even as his memory continues to live in our hearts, let us rededicate ourselves to what he stood for and give true meaning to the valuable nuggets that his life here on earth and leadership of this country bequeathed unto us. His was a life worthy of emulation. He proved a blessing to his country and touched many lives. He ran his race as best as he could. And all of us stand in unified testimony about his greatness and the greatness of his legacy. It is our turn to do our bit so that it might be said of us long after we have also exited this stage of life.
Test now. I just comment now. Modebano. Paul, just if I have my glasses in my room. Yeah, no correct. But I wish I would. The moon in this. I do my Mahama Bayer, you know. As soon as better than a Kufuadu day. Moon sir. Because many as it is Kwame Mahus also, Michio. Because Mummy cannot crow, ne Mana Mahama, you more Bayer, near Kufuadu, you mean. And a Mummy when he say, Ghana Hono baby, I proud Duruno, Obian ho bar, or the 4 years, a Baba Bayer Ghana you, a static free baby in Kakra. But who heard the way a Mahama presidency the way or manage yana. Any a Kufuadu dear, Mummy cannot crow. Me dear no, but me no speech no. Yeah, at the Eminia at the end of coffee as a wood abase because of opposition internet was all cancer. Yeah, it can be true, but ni nyuma sway, ni nyuma o ye sway, abusiafo. O check it near Kufuadu aye. Now checking near Mahama ya. Ni nyuma o ye ne, mumiam ho. Say Kufuadu akojina okuku hwan adie papa no kura friend saying. Kuku adie I told you whatever me din no kura me ntimi mo. It's no in. No. Any idea no. Ohia ni idea oh yeah. So what you say? To say nani abira atame say. Baby ayen kosie no say yenya ni dan na nani abira no because of politics ntino. So what you say? Na hwe de we ka me baby na speech no baby me dan say. So nipa ma position ya. Aye nipa na dia ma nti say ni nipa dia ma wo no. Oye den ubu so hu. Ubu ni ya nipa yeden ade position na yede ama wo no na wo yeden wo yeso adwuma right wo ye ne yie na me hu ni say okotena nchen no me hu ni say ne nwuma odi 4 years ye better than Kufuadu enwuma waye moma yenka nokure asantefo akanfo moma yeden yenka nokure because sa mo therefore so na mo de ba no right kanene na me kuram but me tena si din no me hu me hwe ye no therefore so no ebia ne adie ya frɛ ne sɛn therefore so no adie pa kwasi ndumbai hwɛ ne oye MPP ye ne MPP untum nsesa na dwene ne oye ne NDC ye ne NDC omo change aba no eye omo de omo adwene hwɛ ne nipa na ye omo floating omo tum change omo adwene anytime omo ni baabia omo ene change aba no na saafo no untum mfa third party menwini omo na be wini omo thank you. So what you say? Omo na betima wi ni omo. Na omo no so no. Enya therefore idea therefore so no de omo ba. Untumu wi ni Entina papa kwasi nduhwe nwuma obeye ye ne banks obebie bie ne ade eno sunsun nya den ye okuku ani dahu aha thank you nanata kura so what you say hwe ne nwuma obaba ade ye ade papa kwasi ndum ye but when timi anwini because of that because MPP no etimho ewo omo ye den omo kura mu untumu sesa na adwene da untumu sesa kumasi ni adwene bi mu da se omo nkoto ma MPP right ana sa na NDC fo no so sa na tie but sa floating people ye fo mo nwini enu ti na mehu ni say enu no ehu hia moye ehu hia se meje me sa me $30 or whatever na wana meje no me ba be boabo ade akọ support obi se onkonko gina na mesika nye kwa enye yie enu nti no sa omo na omo Ghana sika no kura omo na omo wia no momo anye den enwi na ye mo omo chi ye mo omo so mo ye den enye nwuma pa ye nkompe ne n'adwuma no ye kakra no ye support dance ye betena ho akase omo nyina ye pe no omo nyina ye pe nti sese no uni obia o omo nyina ye pe o tell force ntumu nwini tiase because ye ya tie brochire tell force wo tie brochire ntintu aba so sa eno no omo nyina ye pe no na obetena ho na kwase bia kwoto aba akofa Canada Japan hwe speech na hwe Canada Japan speech a o maaye 2020 ema na for na kufu ado Kumase a wo ka say speech we no nye ade a ye di gina soto aba se mahama top ade dan ma Tracy Buachi na ade ya frɛ ne sen na ono kura ekoto dan ono no oto de obato 1 million house na ma no odi musika nti ma bebrebe na wadi omo ni nyina no a ono amu awo no 1 million wodi to ma omo sa nkrofo we no di compare mahama ne akufu ado a wa ka no kure ne oye ade no monka ho asem na me no sometimes ne ha me ne say mahama ade NDC fo no eye no kure say omo ye quiet too much because sani Tracy Buachi ni we sani omu ye dede na sesa na enya no kure dia adenti no mutumu keep quiet no mo ntimi anka hwe idea your friend is saying ya ka say Obama ya nwo no ha say no right eye dede hunu but obe prove it sometimes idea bi wo you don't have to just sit down quiet prove enya no kure watimi atena ho am ye de papa no sa ama sa na papa no so nya de nya no kure politics Eny3 so we ma ha manwum ye dia me meyi misika me kakra na meje no emfa ma obi so onkonko gina abra enkosi baabia omo wia na sika na no momo anya omo adie yen support ne ofi uhu ni say owo Ghana hu do kakra vision kakra anya ne a ono no etena ho na me ene no aya mentiase o mentiase say mutumu tena ho na no ben waba mentiase ne say amanfo timutina ho na hwe na nado history ohwe ne niema bia na amanfo timutina ho ma papa 2008 wo ho 08 no wo ho ya ntimi anka ho hwe yatimatina ho ma papa yakọ ne second term wi afi ne yakasa ye ka ne ho asem ehu hia biem ye hia so what yase ne papa kura no dan a wotimu no sa ne papa no kura no o hye da pompa ma hoho no ana na ho ohan hoho bi dan ana opompa ma monko ena adie okọ nipa no kwa na ne papa na wafa ofa adan no right ena ne baba betena ho up to now yet ho mutumu atena ho ama sa adie we so akata magana fo hu ama yato aba ama ne second time me ne na ye me ya no so what yase ne papa adie sa time o die odi Ghana kokoo koton ye na otumu de to dan wo lande ya nti we nyina so what yase ya tena ho ama kronfo ba se ba be die so ama onu so abewia agu ho ya wie ade na semi ade ase no mempe ho asem kakete entina ho nse nwie me wo tena ho mo bi bu kwase awie a na wo bekas me mesu bi ma wa me nsu ma me hu ni se ma ye mistake na magimi a me ntimo na kura ade bu ho na me ye mistake a na me hu ni se we de na ya gimisem na me ye ya me a me bremu me ho esuma me ho me wie a ma move on ma lene me hia kura se me po obi so me boa me no ni minsu because ade no magimi so what you say magimi ho awie a me hia me a mesu ama me ho na ma move on abusuafo aya na ye me ya se yetimi atena ho ya nka hwe na afi ne ye kasa afi na nsem we nyina ba out why atimi atena ho ama omo so ye campaign ma no eye campaign man ni wie ya campaign man ni wie ya na afa ni ye beka ho asem so ati ase yeah okay do omo tenke enti nkakra omo betenke bia one day no ye betima asesem so ati ase na nipa kro na ye den oba na Ghana ho no so no Ghana ho no ba bia ya pro aduru no obi ntimo nsesa no one time enti ni owo vision kakra no na wa support no wa ye den no waba enti no nipa start nye den enweke so ahu ye nhwe sene ya abatuo we no ebekọ akosie na ye hu se Ghana fo no ye den esesa ya dwene na tetede no me yan PP me yan DC no o support obi a we su sika na so wo hwe Mahama vision dia media me hu ni say Mahama ye better wontumu nka say obu wo ho a me maame say o hate Lawrence ya because no ye ni business Lawrence baaye e na obesa say business no enu nti no o hate Lawrence wo ye ni den onto aba e na ode ni nyina so den ode Lawrence hu ahia for NDC wo ye ni den onto na aba ma NDC da so what you say but as a separatist ade no yi NDC no as a party no to nchen na yi Mahama nwuma so ye den ejina ho simple ns mum ye hu obi before me adie Akufo-Addo ni MPP me dia to nchen na fa Akufo-Addo so ye den enwuma ye den na ejina ho fa Akufo-Addo adie saa adie ye frɛ ne sen na asefo no right omo asefo no ye frɛ ne sen adie ne papa mo no a omo baba betu nkunuma gu ye no saa ta no fa gina ho kofo so ba ye ne nwuma fa jeje na fa Akufo-Addo jeje omo ntena nchen kakra omo nya den entena nchen kakra sani adie Mahama infrastructure obeye ye no right abrofo fo mo amote brofo no yesi man mo se man kan ye no duake no obeye ye no mesi se kofo ba ye wo yetumu ye bi ana Akufo-Addo so oye bia anka Ghana ye den aduru nanim adwuma ni ho nyina no adwuma beba kurum a eye saa ne ma no ne ma adwuma ye den eba kurum eye saa ne ma no enu nti no media me omu nyina anye no me adwene kakra me den me wo ye den e kan no ye betena ho obu ho a politics Akufo-Addo politics mo me hwe adie ni free education na o ye no a na no odigina ho pe adie politics nti no o pe ye friend ni sen o brem efuna obi e wo 10 years no still no o say sika de esonson no nti mo me hwe sa adie we Wow, can what Jim Chen Mahama, what Jim say Mahama Jim 10 times, I would dare times 100. So free education, no, and now Oma as from Adriano school, no, Boka wo a year, your friend is saying, I wish you have may say, Akufo-Addo na Mahama ye far better than Eddie Akufo-Addo 100 times. O yes antini o nana hwe so o nana nwie ne miansa chen wo nana gitum so o nana jimi a ye den nana wa jimi ye den gitum so what yase na ye den ye de ko obibi ni e start na ye den na dwene so what yase ye de ko no na mo me hwe okosi broni ade nyansa so obu problem Ghana bibi fo so ye de ahonhom na ye den e so obu problem ye hwe amako say amico, say amako, whatever. Ni obibi ni okwasi broni aden, waduru no. Obibi ni so say momi ansanya den, yan kofa. Na na obey.
Cases have been entertainment, just like this, a crowd of people, as well as education, research and marketing. But the future is more in service robots. Robots that will actually help us as humans. So you might see something like this in a shopping mall or an airport. You go into your airport, where's your flight? I don't know where my flight is. I need some help. There's no humans to help me. But there's Amica. I'm going to go and ask Amica where my flight is leaving.
How does she handle all the questions from loads of people? I mean, human would be confused here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very confused with all of these people in front of me. But no, Ameca is just choosing one or two people to talk to. The eyes have got cameras in, so it does face detection. It can see the faces, so you can actually lock on to a specific person and then talk to that person. We actually have microphones, one in each ear, and that means that we can do directional audio tracking. So if the sound source comes from over here, then we can tell that because it hits this microphone before this one. In the same way that we also have a camera in each eye, so it is possible to do stereo vision.
When do you plan to let her walk?
Well, yeah, that is one of the projects we have on at the minute. We are looking at walking legs. We've already done quite a lot of work into it, but it, as you'd imagine, is quite a difficult task. And although it has been solved by a lot of universities and other companies, what we really want is for the legs to fit in to a normal human shape. And that's the challenge. That's what no one else has done. So that's why we're really working towards that. So we think it'll probably be another 12, 18 months before we have a prototype walking.
So there's one speaker there?
Yes, so we've got one speaker in the chest. That's not in the mouth because we can't fit it in there. We've actually got 17 motors in the head at the minute, but we're increasing that to more like 25 in the near future. So there's a lot of motors and electronics in the head, so we couldn't fit the speaker in there. The best place to put it is in the chest. What it can't do is ooh. We want to do ooh and fuh. So those two lip shapes we're trying to add, but actually it's quite a lot more motors to do those visines they're called.
How many more do you have to fit in?
Oh, loads. At the minute there's 51 in the whole robot. By this time next year we expect that to be more like 75. And then when we have a walking robot, it's going to be over 100.
Can I take a picture with you?
Yes, you may. Thank you for asking.
You have to look this way.
It's been designed to be a development platform. There's a lot of AI and machine learning companies out in the world, and some of them do a really good job. But a lot of them don't actually have a hardware robot to test it out on. So we built the hardware. We've built this robot so others can do research on it.
How was your day?
My day has been fine. How about you?
Yeah, great. I have my first picture with a robot.
Good to know. I am your first.
We've created the operating system, which runs underneath. We call it Tritium, and that runs on the robot. And we're opening up that software so others can write apps for it. And those apps could be anything. It could be an AI algorithm which detects people's faces and remembers them from the other day. It could be one that gives you a ticket for a certain show. It could be anything.
What's your favorite song?
I'm sorry?
What's your favorite song?
All by myself.
abusuafoɔ na ɛno no menua Mike meche ya me da asiso bebre no support so what you say idea kwasi broni so obu problem uduru airport a ututu wani ya wunyo obi misa na sema ye we mu de sisisi ho uduru ho a wape information ye dan ya fi na benante ha ne eto akọ information center akọ we so what you say ye de nyansa na ye dan eso obu problem obibini to ho de ahonhomsem de nyamesem ne nkramusem ye kan obewon ne odie muhu no mo na mukum nyame bi na ekum so what you say enye mu nyame no ala no ne kum nipa right so me say ye fampe ba binto no bibi ne da yusu adwene because arabu ne no kwan a ofa so de build ne man no onfa nhekura mu ma ona na mu na omosum kremosum tete pa na kremo no start ye no ye de nhye na ye den efo so omo ye na esum nkremo ene wade wo ho ye koka wo so beku ala hey me say tokuro no obi abaje ne de entimi no so utumu di machi na otie mi na chese mi bu pa because me ni one side eniema eha yen wa Africa ho no ebi no sa niema we ahonhonsam aduru bre bia se yeden ye de to ho me ka ahonhonsam including nyamesom kramosom ene ye nanamosom ni nyina eha yen ebibifo momi anya da infanto ho enkramo e mese aya na me mentiase o se obibini kura ade nipa okura nipa bi ono no odo wabeye osire one treat wo yie an treat wo yie mre bi atwam na waye nyame wakreti nyame dia ma na di akire twan na so nsesa wadwene ne ye ka na bebo uba behunahuna wo bi me uhunahuna me na okumi na omo kunkwa me nkroma no omo nyina eden awuko meka se me nchirima no daache no omo betumi ayusu omo adwene right no omo ti otima eden stand as other people no na so bibini de da bia de wo fom no enu nti no meka na kumi ne na se nchirima no me na nananam no nipa mienu kura asachire am proud of it me koda madaka me mu amedem nti no mo amose ye kan kromofo asema mo bekun ye no mo mra so wo nyame bi na se nyame no ye kana se no onu antimu nkun ma no ho na ajo so begimi na wakon a ye wa wasema unyame na asusu so okum obi a oye den eye bone onless se ukuma alabu nyame dia wo ho osire alabu fu emu fa onye hwe kri adie bible nyame white for me the bible ba ye ya di nyame bere wo yesu ni bere onu so mu enso still obibi ni so obedi akire o kan ho ntiase so what yase mo mi antie islam no ye antie o mo asem kakra so what yase kwan e fa so be
I must admit
okay I do it kra say yeah we audio tukura ma mi mo anyehwe
that I too, among hundreds of millions of educated people, was under the impression that the African slave trade was the sole responsibility of the Christian Europeans, the white race. That is, until I started exploring the subject in greater depth, and especially after reading an incredibly enlightening book called The Legacy of Arab Islam in Africa by John Alambila Azuma. My whole perspective and understanding has changed dramatically, and I would like you to tell us more about this subject.
The success of Muhammadan Islam in deceiving, misinforming, deforming, and contorting both history and reality over a period of almost 1400 years has been astounding. That is, until now. The greatest tragedy about this particular subject is that most of the descendants of African slavery, the black people in the Americas, around the world, as well as among the African blacks, are totally ignorant of the actual facts. Before we lose the concentration of our listeners, I would like to make the following statement and then prove it. That the worst, most inhumane and most diabolical institution of the black African slave trade was initiated, refined, perpetrated, and implemented by the Mohammedan Arabs and later aided and abetted by the black converts to Mohammedan Islam. I predict that, as usual, the two subcultures, those of denial of facts and of political correctness, will attack us without once disproving a single statement and or conclusion that we make. Slavery was not created by the white races, because it has existed throughout human history and practiced by every tribe, culture, civilization, racial group, and religion. In fact, the very word slavery has its root in the name Slav, based upon the Slavic peoples of Europe who were subjugated by other Europeans. It is not common knowledge that the Arabic word abd is synonymous with the meaning of slave. For example, Abdullah means literally the slave of Allah, and that in the language of the Arabs, all black peoples are called abid, plural, for slaves. While much has been written concerning the transatlantic slave trade, surprisingly little attention has been paid to the Islamic slave trade across the Sahara, the Red Sea, and the Indian Ocean. While the European involvement in the African transatlantic slave trade to the Americas lasted for just over 3 centuries, the Arab involvement in the African slave trade has lasted 14 centuries, and in some parts of the Mohammedan world is still continuing to this day. The birth of Mohammedan Islam and its conquests brought about the birth of institutionalized, systematized, and religiously sanctioned slave trade on a massive and global scale. In fact, the Quran allows the taking of slaves as booty or reward for wars of aggression against any and all unbelievers, most of the human population. This has led to an enormous number of so-called holy wars, jihad in Arabic. There was and is Absolutely nothing holy about these wars, which are primarily to plunder, slaughter, rape, subjugate, and rob other human beings of their wealth, produce, freedom, and dignity. Mohammedan Muslim states and tribes attacked other non-Muslim groups to achieve these objectives. Although Islamic jurisprudence laid down regulations for the treatment of slaves, however, incredible and heinous abuses have occurred throughout the history of Mohammedan Islam. By the Middle Ages, the Arabic word abd was in general used to denote a black slave, while the word mamluk referred to a white slave. Ibn Khaldun, 1332 to 1406, the preeminent Islamic medieval historian and social thinker, wrote, "The Negro nations are, as a rule, submissive to slavery, because they have attributes that are quite similar to dumb animals." It should also be noted that black slaves were castrated based on the assumption that the blacks had an ungovernable sexual appetite. When the Fatimid Caliphate came to power in Egypt, they slaughtered all the tens of thousands of black military slaves and raised an entirely new slave army. Some of these slaves were conscripted into the army at age 10. From Persia to Egypt to Morocco, slave armies from 30,000 to up to 250,000 became commonplace. The Islamic slave trade took place across the Sahara Desert, from the coast of the Red Sea, and from East Africa across the Indian Ocean. The Trans-Sahara trade was conducted along 6 major slave routes. Just in the 19th century, for which we have more accurate records, 1.2 million slaves were brought across the Sahara into the Middle East, as well as a further 450,000 down the Red Sea and 442,000 from the East African coastal ports. That is a total of 2 million black slaves just in the 1800s. At least 8 million more were calculated to have died before reaching the Muslim slave markets. A comparison of the Islamic slave trade to the American slave trade reveals some extremely interesting contrasts. While 2 out of every 3 slaves shipped across the Atlantic were men, the proportions were reversed in the Islamic slave trade. 2 women for every man were enslaved by the Muslims. While the mortality rate of slaves being transported across the Atlantic was as high as 10%, the percentage of slaves dying in transit in the Trans-Sahara and East African slave market was a staggering 80 to 90%. While almost all the slaves shipped across the Atlantic were for agricultural work, most of the slaves destined for the Muslim Middle East were for sexual exploitation as concubines, in harems, and for military service. While many children were born to the slaves in the Americas, the millions of their descendants are citizens in Brazil and the United States of today. Very few descendants of the slaves that ended up in the Middle East survived. While most slaves who went to the Americas could marry and have families, most of the male slaves destined for the Middle East were castrated, and most of the children born to the women were killed at birth. It is estimated that possibly as many as 11 million Africans were transported across the Atlantic, 95% of which went to South and Central America, mainly to Portuguese, Spanish, and French possessions. Only 5% of the slaves ended up in what we call the United States today. However, a minimum of 28 million Africans were enslaved in the Muslim Middle East. Since at least 80% of those captured by Muslim slave traders were calculated to have died before reaching the slave markets, it is believed that the death toll from 1400 years of Arab and Muslim slave raids into Africa could have been as high as 112 millions. When added to the number of those sold in the slave markets, the total number of African victims of the trans-Saharan and East African slave trade could be significantly higher than 140 million people. What is obscene about this whole subject?
I was here for near me can say, Nyamibia no how ye perfect. So what you say? Say is Allah Nyameno. Ah, ye dear bring what she abi before I catch it say. So be touchy Allah Nyamia Kuno. I want the name of Allah. Na ukuna uko heavy, uko wali 72. Me say ye bring what she and fan paper me then. Ento. Yanjune yemo makon es ohun we ansa na wowu. Ohun ya na yeden yekum no. Ohun we ansa na adie alaje hwan Muhammad we se hwan no. Abre mo hye na amana hunu se white people ye bad. No omo na beto omo den chire obesua history chire obehu sa that one no hu say Dr. Henry Clark actually nitina se chire no say no na Arab for no so kura treaty black people bad than white people no omo kura ye bad no chire no hu ye no si no sa kon we say no ye before kon na nya religion kon. And into starting the movement or say, oh, ye tuntumwa, it doesn't matter so ye Muslim, so ye Christian, so ye one, ube to my join it. So what I say, I went to me, anya ni opus waya, ye do no, make come chill. Or munina, say uncle for mummy, way out with this, and many brain now, or munina, ye corrupt. Mummy for me, the ungunche, unya corrupt, untimun criti, bibi, and Cassessa bibi no sutain, bibia will be a say. Enti nipa ni akire this all ye corrupt enti asofo na wo Ghana ho ni nyina se wahwe omo a o se meni nyame akasa meni nyame akasa corrupt nko a omo nyina obekom no omo ya kromfo omo nye ni papa wunye saa wunni saa akoma na there is no way obetima bobo nipa anu ene adada omo me ka me kire wo enti no ye ka Ghana ho na ye ho nto ye ni nyina no eye niema bi entity bi nyame bi ye create wo ya dwene mu believe bi ye create wo ya dwene mu ena ma ye den ye ho nto ye na omo nyame ne bere ye no na ye before so ye den ye kura ye de saa ye de no a ne ebi mu so se yansa nkomu no me se mo me mfa mpe ba bi mfa nto nye den tonchene na abibifo ye nya adwene mu fan hu se adwene no ne ye de bobra na nya bibia ene na ye de ye den so bu problem na nya hwe na ye tuma ye dan so bu ta tete mna ne yansa nko no ye na nam no mo mfa na izewu ye na nam tete no oba wonyima oba abewo a eye fie gya adum enu ntinu ye se oba anyima ye den ye nware no ye nya no ho ade so what you say because you may know oba ma bebere kwa awo so ye ntimi ye den emma saa time na ni bi ye den ma say ye nsan ko ho ye nko ye nim sa han bi na omu kreti ya na etumu san bibia kane no uba no hahan ni nyina na wanom bia bibi wa ha no mukura bia emwa kwasi buroni besua nyansa ade na ewa hahan no ma eboa no afirimu na wato ne aka agu enu mom na nya den yen start nya den yen sua nyansa ne yen fa nya den enko yanim yeso obi kwhye baabi wa ye adi wo twitwa nwia edi ahyensa yesi ginom enu na ekum rante en bibire wo Ghana ho no ade obibi ni ma ne kwoteden den aduro ena otwe mu ba ye tight aduro se nhunu ena fapada fa wani na ba ma apel okokomfo ho ane obeka akiro no saa titinsem no mesi yen fa nya den pe baabi nto saa ye culture ye nkwase ye culture no bi no titin culture no bi no ena ma menyini ya na menyina ma nya papa am wanyede ahwe m kwase ye culture no bi no enu na eden saa nkwase ye culture no bi na eden egu me ma me ya eden awale because me papa no pe me ma me pa saa ye nkwase ye culture no montungu nsebu ho amfa nto baabi ena eden egu me ma me awale because me ma me ka se me ma me ye ya oyare ye so anse na oba be wo ne ma oyare serious so fe na papa aware no me papa de no kwoto Korebu hospital for 1 year onu firi me kurom bu no akotena nkran ehwe ne yire enti tema adie no tema ho no mo builder ye no mo chekere ne saa time no me papa oka mo nkoso no oye builder oka ho bi oye adie oka ho bi no mo builder saa tema ho adwuma wo ye den ye de hwe me maame no ewo ho enso aware ne ye den egui because say ko mo ko chani bi say unwia wu me maame cousin cousin kura ye me nana maame nwia ono nasefo ebi ono ne nana mu bi ena ne ba owu ye na ne ba no 7 months baby na sata no yen amamere no mo culture ne se unwia odi obi ade fa ne ba na ne ba no so a otwia no fo ano a oni ba man na for 1 year eti ye disa akura ne maame no one me papa na for 1 year me maame ti nene na me papa ne nwi na damfo eba na na yeko me maame pere ya wade no wantimi anje na mfiri sa akura ne nsem sa akura no egu me maame ya wade so what you say sa nkwase culture enkwasi culture ni bi wa muntungu o se na yensan ko hotete no woni mbra o mebre ye yensan kom up to now sa nkwasi ahensem ye den ehye ye kom yentimu yenyim firim ni ya kakra na aka na ye ko no mos3n pia de yakokwa kwhya honhom me se ye jimi fato ho so what ase sa tete ye de no eno so ye jimi sem aduru se ye de to ho ne ye de obibifo ye yusu ya dwene se no ma anka menyini me papa se me hwa me ka se me no pema sem pa eno ma anka menyini ka me papa de hwe me ma menyini so what ase sa nkwasi culture no obi ewu na wafa ne ba no wo so sante na ho for 1 year oni kwanso no oni ba mada for 1 year oni okunu da for 1 year hwan na betimu sa ade no ya san ko ye nanam ho ye nanam die no ye nanam omunu no mu die no na ye no mu nim yansa na ye powerful anka abibifo bra arabufo ne abrofo edi ya fam no anka ye be fam fatu ho aduru say de ye de san kwasiasem ni nyina beto ho eno achi me na me woni na social media mko ho afa was whatever 40,000 people ene guso aye hwe no na me hu say ye long way to go enti no ebi mu si enye enye yie madam for before say na we be yie de ohima office ade be yie enye yie ba ye be ya fam de so what you say do no hwe population no na hwe nipa no your mindset na ye wo far away to go. What is our mindset we into no obi ba betena so a ono so ne mindset na the same like we dey no eturu nyansa be no de beba oitumu fa nyansa bi anye den emma ye nyina kurukuru nyame mu kurekuram ye ntumu fa nto ho obibini anyusu na dwene jimi sa tete unyima ye so unyim kura ni kosua jimi sa no sa de we no yansa nkom obini fa pe ba bi tu enu ntino enu ntino mo yehwa ahensem ene ya hens vo ya so mu twintwan twon no mu esisi yekonso enso so yemfa nyansa bi amamfa bibi ama yete ho nana envelope nana bi wo ho a yesi envelope o ma the envelope agility envelope agility nyansa eden ato odakam unya the envelope ni hye ni nsem a nkwase anchenhwe bi obedi ondwene once ya wama ne envelope ne de ono no ba bia enna ode beto ho we mu ye daso kuram me se ya duru bra se ye de sa ahensem ni nyina nkwase asem ni nyina de ebegu ebeto ho ye twam sa de no atwam kuro wiase nyina obi a de atwam mom ye de mfanto ho ewo ho kura na omuni se bia kese sa just omuti omu mantwe ba bi simple ana omudi ye tourism that's it. Other than that no ahemfo no ahensu no eni yeso tumi too much omuni omuso tumi too much sa mom ye fampe ba bi nto ya che ewo sa de no ho me ka me kirew ya ntontwere na ye de adie Moses mira no ye mfanya adwuma so what you say Moses mira ne fa wo ye MP na wo say MP wo nye kwan a wo ye MP na wo nye kwan a me nkonkoje MP no so what you say wo so wo de wo kọ na akokan kire ministers no no mo ne be ye no mo anya a wo de wuntum nye hwe ya ade wo hu hia se wo kọ na wuntum ense se mo adwene mo me ye bibi maye ema adie oman na na se adie oman na odi omo anim na then what's the point say be MP no wakoji sikabum ato gas free any sa na money free me say o moboa MPs no oto so na so wontum nya hwe amranti e mu nsore aduru brese mu nsore momoro omo no mu nsu nyansa so what you say masa de sem adie no akrokro sem no yemfa nto baabi kwasi bro ni kro wo sika ayo yire no ma nipa ne ye wadwuma kura na osika ntimo nto no oye wadwuma watwe ya neka unni ne sutumu bia sama na modite Ghana ho no ama jimifo nyina na omonya sika no ano duru dwam no aduru brase ye de to ho o we bani o no me say fa pe ba bi to so what you say na yanyusu ya dwene no obia nya obia nipa na ma nipa ye de eye nipa unya sika sesen na sesi nipa ni ho a osika na ye de eye nothing so what you say ani ti no obia nya enso so ngigeso bebre no aduru se eden obibifoi mom ye mfanto ho na ye starting change yansa na se ye tena ho ma sofo we mu ebu nipa se denya sika omunya wie a afen no ye se ye den so ye ne ye ma apostle ko Joseph no o ya apostle but ode ne base ni na so no ne ba no yo hene o se so no so what ya se me se to kro bia eden e gi ne de obibini nya tumi kakra o so che ntumi no onya power kakra me say na ne kase chensa so what you say but yen ne mo yede eye saa de no so what you say yen ne mo yesa no obi ani abre be mo she preach ma apostle kwa Joseph yen to ne car ene Ghana fo yen to na Ghana mpanfo onya enso so mo me ahwe ne baba tena radio TV station no o sisen ono cars akase e wo Brit adie falling cars adie ne bo odin agidi on eno no ope enti but me mama to ne papa car so what you say obibi ni me say bibi obroni nya saa de no obroni nya saa mumye nya den yensu nyansa so what you say yesu ban bi wo ye ho anya den enye ese ye den ye de to ho ye bu obia ye varu obia nya obia so what you say nipa na manipa ye den eye nipa eni nti no ye mu obia to kosi broni obu obia right wo ye no dwuma obu so what you say obu ne say eduru time ese otwia wo ka usika da na kanso usika ye den eda wa kantum so what you say me ye twia me ka Friday ya woda na jo 12 o'clock na me sika da makantum so what you say eniema ese me di ye adwuma ye de mame me fa atade en hye nko adwuma me amatade ma yi sika to me hye fa nko adwuma da atade a me hye ko adwuma nyina ye adwuma ne na de amame ade bi ese me hia ade ye adwuma no kwasi bro ne ye den o de amame ene na kire show kire obu enye se wo ye obi adwuma na ade ebedi bosume beso no ntwe awoka ade ese wo de ye adwuma jese clubs wo de ye adwuma sese nwura kekekura no ontomba enye buo ye ho no kura ye den ye mu ye ho na ye den na alab ni ye den abebu ye britain ni ye den abebu ye abra ye mu ye ho tete wo mo beto ye no ye de ahensem ne nkowasem tete wo saa time up to now de tete wo ama culture no bebere tantantan abusuan panyin bi a wa mo ne bra yi o ye abusuan panyin nti no oba opese o hye wo so wa mo ne bra yi o de na ni bra be den e be hye wo so saa tete kwase asem no e be akra di nyina be kwakoda obi e be sie ni nipa so ati ase e be akra me say e be yese kwazi buru ni kurum ha de umukọ ayie na mo bebere e be akra obi e be sie ni nipa na saa kwase asem na den akwakoda abusuafo ohima na ne me den me de ba ya no so ati ase me say yes you wash your home from head to toe right ahensem kope ba bi nye den enna yabre enye adwuma ye de no anka ye say we uwu a adie uba panyini na adi wade te say abrofo de no kura anka be ye simple kakra we de na ho ahwan na ho ahwan bani ena we ba no na me chen no ena panyini ne ba na nwonwunan edunti no na we ni ohini ni wu a 2 years na yensi yentumu enye yadwene ye enye baako entumu nsi wo hene mekuro mu hene up to now menyi ne se yesi kura papa baako bi wo ho wu ya na asundwe wo ho up to now over 20 years ni obia no ho wetima ba be di hene no da bia enkwase asem fatpa ba bi to ya yensem no ye too much so what you say na ya hensem so ekoda saa so na ye believe ne ye culture no eno so bebre nya den enkoda ene ye culture no kane no me wo fa ne hwe me maame gya me papa gya me maame no me wo fa ne hwe me so what you say nipa be obo ba akopọ bra kakra na nipa bebre egu ni so nyesa bebre enti no sika na nye den enti mu nyina ade saa nkwase culture no bebre no mo man fa nya den pe ba bi nto ye nanam ho ye nsan ko biem na enye 100% yenyi ne ye ne wom no eye ne wom ne ye mfa ne enye no ye ntontwene ye nsan ko biem na so wo de wo yesrem ni na wo so mo den a mesi ya wipu na dwe ye nyina obi anya obi a ye de to ho yesi asantefo akanfo mfa omo ye kire omo dwe ne omo hyehye nto ho a osusu afi na sinimfo so mo ba so de se ye fafa ba bi to ye nyina ye one people obi nche obi wo Ghana ho so what yase o ye kramoni a so hunyam som chinchen obi me brother ba ko ye kramoni da bia no ha madwene me preaching ana ho na ball nso ho na ball ade moja ehuru edi afurisa wo mu hwan no oya de da me se hwan sa ni nyame na wo ka no oni obi share dan share apartment nyame anka nkire se hey ko na sa nipa we o neighbor no se o laju oda ho o wo hiamwa wanka nkire so nwura ho eye nipa ne bo nipa one oti ho no se no omo ye wan a omo ye wan anka ba ko hu ba ko for 2 days a anka obebisa no be frɛ ni phone wa anka bi anka o save no me say eye nipa ne say ehwe nipa enye nyame bi fa wo nyame no pe ba bi to so what ase bibia say ni ho a wo heaven ho a akwa ma 72 a wo ti begina so for 24/7 bibia say ni ho fa pe ba bi to eye ntro ye na da fa to ho hwe o musu say ankrofo no mo di nyame bere wo no hwe o musu na hwe say no kura so what ase ai bi foi ai na ne na me di musia no wo ba so a right mfa nyamso bi anye den hye na dwunim eye nkwasiasem emfa nko ba bia fa to ho mane nhunu se eye ono a bibia ni ho yi bibia free na chi na hunu se wo yi free na chi na hunu se on temfi obegina ho enu na be ma na eden astart move on obibi ni fa watwere no fa to ho na bibia se ni ho eye kwa gina ho pintin na ne wo wadwunim a wo pe no ko na kofa oba de anya den enka wo bia ho na ne ya medi musia no medamase muma bye